Thank you for tuning into The Back Page. It is episode 5 on October 11th of 2023. I'm your host, Collin Crisp.
And I'm Carter Sims, and today we'll be taking you some recent Hayes action, some recent college football action, talk about what we're feeling about some NFL teams, and get into the thick of the baseball playoffs. Now, recently, for Hayes sports, football beat Scioto for the first time ever last Friday. Obviously, it sets the stage for a huge game against Canal this Friday on senior night, with a Canal team coming in undefeated. And obviously Hayes has only lost one game, so a win would put us in number 1 in the conference with that tiebreaker. In boys soccer last night, the boys won 4-0. The girls volleyball won 3-1 last night, and girls soccer tied 1-1.
Ohio State kicked off the college football Saturday on Big Noon, and they played a undefeated Maryland team. Had some surprising victories in the Big Ten East going into this Saturday, and it was a game that was less hyped up than it should have been. I was really hyping it up to the fan base because I felt like it was kind of flying under the radar, but it was really close through 3 quarters, and then the fourth quarter we just kind of ran away with it, ended up winning 37-17. What was your thoughts going through the game?
I feel like it was kind of the yearly cardiovascular health check that we always seem to have against Maryland. Like it seems like even though Maryland's never really been a top team in the Big Ten or had any national contention like ever, there's always like a little bit of struggle when Ohio State plays them, at least early on. Sometimes it's come down to the wire in the past couple of years, and then obviously this year was about 2 quarters before Ohio State kind of woke up and got back into the form that we'd seen them in previous games. But I think the big takeaway from this game for me was Marvin Harrison Jr.
100%. With 8 catches, 163 yards, and a touchdown in a highlight-filled game, he once again proved he's one of the best players in football. I think that down the line, his health is a major component of this team's offensive success. We saw what can happen when we lose one of our top running backs. It took a long time for that running game to get going, and the O-line hasn't looked like it's one of the best ones of the last decade for the Buckeyes. So with the new quarterback at the helm, we need that receiver talent to really come through, and he's probably our best one, especially with some second and third string injury right now. Him being one of the better ones in the country, we got to hang on to him. I feel like the win could have been a little more convincing. I don't think it was bad, but Maryland didn't play great. Like they played way better against Michigan State and Indiana, and they didn't look like A-tier them. And even with that, they were still running the ball really successfully, especially in the first half. And I feel like Ohio State hasn't had a game where it's just like all completely came together.
Yeah, I think when you're gonna have to find different ways to win games. I think this is the type of game where maybe you're not happy with the actual process of how the result came about, but I think down the line, there's a possibility that when we look back on this game in December and January, this win looks a lot better than it does now if Maryland can kind of continue the success they had earlier in the season the rest of the way out.
That's true. I thought about that too, where I was thinking I think Maryland last week was a ranked team. I know that they wasn't a ranked team, but if there's 17 undefeated Power 5 teams and Maryland's blew out everyone they've played, I feel like that should be a ranked team. And that's just, to me, down the line, even if they lose to Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, if they win the rest of their games, that's a ranked team by the end of the year. So that could look better once we get there. A game that could have looked better for one side of the ball was the other Big Noon game, Oklahoma versus Texas, a battle of undefeated Big 12 contenders and probably the 2 best teams in that conference. Oklahoma ended up winning what was a chaotic, thrilling game on a last-second beautiful pass from Dylan Gabriel. It was a 34-30 was your final score. It was a really chaotic game. I didn't really know what to take away from it completely because I don't think either team looked like themselves.
Yeah, part of you wants to kind of jump the Texas ship again because I feel like every other year really we're told Texas is back and they're going to be the ones to come out of the Big 12, and some people might be a little easy to kind of jump up this bandwagon, but do you think that this is really a sign of things to come, or it was just kind of a rough game for Texas against a really good team?
strangely, after this game was over, I liked Texas even more than I did beforehand. And that's weird coming out of a loss. And I don't like being the big quality loss guy. I hear that way too much. But in this game, Oklahoma, that was the best they've looked under the new head coach. Like, Brett Venables is the best he's looked by a long shot. That was a perfect game. They've executed essentially everything besides a block punt early perfectly. And if it takes, Texas looked awful when it comes to just coaching decisions. They had bad clock management, a bunch of penalties, a bunch of turnovers early. If it comes down to you playing that poorly, especially for one that first half, and it takes a perfect team out of the second best team in your conference performance to beat you, I think that makes you look better. Because I don't think Texas is going to look that bad again. I think that they'll learn from that. They'll move on. There won't be that rivalry energy in the air. You won't ever have another Oklahoma-Texas game happen the rest of the season for them.
Right.
I mean, this is a really – if you're going to lose a game as Texas and still be a national championship contender, this is it. And this is how it would go. In the SEC's action of the week, we had two undefeated teams, while one was still favored. Number 1, Georgia was playing number 20, Kentucky at home. It was about a 14-point spread going into it. I have not been high on Georgia up to this point. I don't know how much I've vocalized out in the pod, but I know that going into it, I thought that Georgia, with the Auburn game and the South Carolina game, they didn't really look like themselves, and I was lower on them than number 1. I didn't think they were a top 1 team in the country. I was wrong. I'd like to formally apologize for this because this was brutal. Kentucky lost 51-13, and this is essentially as dominant as a top 25 matchup can get. It was never close. Kentucky got outgained by almost 400 yards. It was really just on all cylinders. Georgia decimated them in the defensive line, the secondary, on offense. The passing game was elite. They ran the ball down their throats. They could have did anything they want. That game could have been 70-0 at the end of it if they wanted it to. It was just all out. It was never close. I think that if this is the Georgia team we got, then this is the two-time national championship winner. They're back. And the SEC has looked really weak so far up to this point, and with Georgia being the only team who hadn't really played anybody, it was like it's either Georgia is away from everybody or it's just not a good conference for once this year. It's looking like it's Georgia's conference to lose now, with Alabama being really questionable here where they've had some really close games, and LSU, they've dropped a couple already, and it's Tennessee lost to Florida, and that's not a good look. This is Georgia's conference to give away now, and I think that this is what this win symbolizes. The other big night game was the Notre Dame Louisville game, not LSU. Louisville Notre Dame, and Louisville ended up pulling the upset. What did you think of the performance?
I mean, so my thing after the Notre Dame game was that I said it was kind of like the championship of the non-conference season, and obviously there's going to be big games on the line for Ohio State, with Penn State and Michigan on the horizon, but I'm not a fan of Notre Dame having the most stressful games immediately after playing Ohio State and making that win look worse and worse every week. Previous week, nail biter against Duke, obviously unfortunate injury at the end of that game, but then this game it was like Louisville kind of almost felt like they were in the driver's seat the whole time, and then fourth quarter just stepped on the gas. What was you kind of take away from that game?
I feel like I don't think that we should give up on Notre Dame yet. I don't think that that's what this means. I think that they played two of the better teams in the ACC, which we've talked about being really unpredictable up to this point. I think that's starting to slowly solidify itself as we've realized that Miami may not be what we thought they were, and Clemson may not be what they thought we were, but Louisville looks better than we anticipated. And North Carolina does as well. Duke does now. And I think out of the top 3 teams in the ACC, they played 2 of them back-to-back, this one on the road. And you cannot have 5 turnovers in a game look pretty. I don't think there will be another game where Notre Dame turns the ball over 5 times. At least if they do, then this team's way worse than I thought they were. The fact that the game was as close as it was until the fourth quarter happened and the turnover differential was at 5, I think says a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think that if if there's 2 turnovers, 3 turnovers, Louisville don't score 33. And I think that down the line, if Notre Dame can get that ball security under control, like we saw against us, then in theory, this team doesn't lose games like this again.
Yeah. Moving up to the professional ranks now, the NFL season is, in full swing now. We're starting to figure out some teams' identities, what we think about some teams, who's good, who's not. But there's still some teams that we're really not sure about. And so we're going to play a little game here called Buy, Sell, or Hold. And I'm going to give you some teams, and we're going to talk about whether we buy, sell, or hold, our stock in these particular teams. So our first team is the Dallas Cowboys.
I think that with the Cowboys, we've had such a roaring start to the season, and now our last couple performances have kind of dwindled back down. And I think thanks to that, especially with the 49ers loss, when it comes to the regular season, I still think they're a good team, but postseason, I think I'm selling on the Cowboys. I don't know how that offense is going to be able to perform against the 49ers-esque defense. If they play a defense of that caliber in the playoffs, I'm not convinced they can get to the 30s in the points department. And then defensively, they're not indestructible like we thought they could be. Even in week 1, 2, 3, we were talking about if this team wins games, we'll have to be on defense when it comes to really good teams. And it don't look like that's something that they can guarantee do now.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will, we talked about in previous weeks, kind of around the NFL world, that the Cowboys really struggled in the red zone. So I appreciate the fact that they just really didn't get in the red zone in this game. So, stick to your strengths, I guess. But, I mean, I know a lot of people are critical of the Cowboys, obviously, because they have a huge fan base and haven't really lived up to expectations. And a lot of that falls onto the shoulders of Dak Prescott a lot. And I think some of that gets blown out of the water. But at the same time, I mean, this offense has just looked kind of out of sync and disappointing for a few weeks now, and you start to wonder, can they really keep up in this NFC that I think is a lot better than we thought it would be going into this year?
100%. With teams in the NFC East like the Eagles being really good, and then if you go west, the Rams are kind of surprising people early, and the 49ers are doing really good, and the South, the Saints look really good now. I'm not sure the Cowboys, after round 1, where do they go?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would, by the nature of the question, I'm selling my stock in the Cowboys. I'm not sure it's ever going to get any higher, and I don't know if there's, there's much longer before it really drops off when these important games down the line come up. So I'm selling Cowboys right now. A team, I will be honest, that I'm buying though is my own team, the Cincinnati Bengals, and I might just be biased, but for the first time this year, it looks like Joe Burrow was back.
Yes, I agree with that. And as a Falcons fan, I don't think I'm too biased about the Bengals. So from an unbiased perspective, I think that I'm buying in this team. If we're doing a stock analogy here, after week 1, you can't get much lower than that. And since then, we've watched the stock in this team rise. They've got better and better every week. And that's with Joe Burrow's health still being pending. I don't think that he'll be injured all year. They're going to get him healthy. So once we get towards the end of the year and he gets healthy and that offense is firing on all cylinders, closer to what we've seen more recently than earlier, I think the Bengals are the same Super Bowl contender we've seen them be for the last couple of years now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's tough to recover from an injury in the season while still playing. So, big game against the Seahawks this weekend and then the bye week. And then a lot of tough opponents right after that. But I'm hoping that this kind of as this goes on, the Bengals offense gets more comfortable and Joe kind of gets back to full strength. I mean, we kind of see at least the short checkdowns that he's so good at and hitting guys in stride, the little things kind of come together. And you're not going to depend on Jamar Chase breaking the Bengals, single game receptions record in every week. But at the same time, I mean, this was the first time, that it looked like the Bengals kind of had free will on offense to an extent. And, Jamar Chase had a quote after the last game that he was always bleeping open. And in this last weekend, he was always bleeping open.
Mm-hmm.
The next team that we're going to kind of throw out there is the Baltimore Ravens.
I think that injury-wise, this team is such a phenomenon. How does this happen every year? And we've seen this team get decimated by injuries year in and year out. And we're starting to see the roots and the teeth of that bite into this team now. And I just don't like buying stock in something that I've seen the story of and not work year in and year out. So I want to sell the team solely based off the fact that I think what's happened for 3-4 years now is going to happen again.
I mean, the North is tough because I think with the Browns and the Steelers and Ravens, there are a lot of good teams that aren't great, if that makes sense. And they're going to have big wins and win big games. But then they're also going to have kind of stinker performances. And especially when two AFC North teams play each other, like everything just gets thrown out the window for some reason. One team could be undefeated on the season, and one team could have not won a game all year, and all that just goes out the window when they play each other. So I'm not going to take too much out of a low scoring game against the Pittsburgh Steelers for the Ravens, but I think the trend for the past couple of weeks has been kind of a bad sign, and if it's anything like past year, it's kind of a sign that this is a Ravens team that kind of tends to deteriorate as the year goes on. Now, I'm selling Ravens stock as well. Now, the final team that we're going to throw out is the Houston Texans.
I am not ready to buy the team yet. I want to sell them for this year, and I want to be if I was a preseason buyer for next year, I'd buy them. But when it comes to this year, I'm not ready yet. But it's not caused that offense. That offense is really, 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 really surprising and impressive, and it's really cool how they built that offense in 1 year. But going into the season, we did a segment like this, and one of them was the Lions. And I sold them the Lions because I said that I was really impressed with the high-caliber, explosive offense they had, but their defense just wasn't ready yet. And I think that these Texans are turning into what the Lions have been. They'll have their stinker games where their defense doesn't show up and their explosiveness doesn't click. And this year it's not going to all come together. I think that down the line, though, this is building into a team that can do that.
Yeah, I was kind of hold on to this Texans team because pound for pound right now, aside from all the important stuff that we factor in when we talk about quarterbacks, like obviously like legacy and experience to make games and all that stuff. If you look at just the performances this year, CJ Stroud has been one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's guys that we would put above him with, more tenure and, proven a little bit more in the league. But I think it kind of gives you confidence going forward. And like you said, that defense is going to need years of building before we really look at them as a contender or anything. But personally, I would hold on to this Texans stock just because I'm willing to ride it out. And if I'm a Texans fan, I know that these next couple of years are going to have some growing pains, but I feel like you're finally starting to get back to that point of competitive football again. Mm-hmm. And you look at the South. I mean, the South is always a toss-up. The Jaguars have been outside the country for the past 2 weeks, and obviously they represented the division in the playoffs last year and kind of made a little surprise run to the division round in January, and I don't see any reason that the Texans couldn't kind of scrap for that last playoff spot, and if chips fall their way, might end up in the second weekend of playoff football. So obviously not a team that I'm taking to make any noise in terms of winning the Super Bowl, but I think if things kind of fall their way here, I like what I've seen so far, and I'm definitely holding on tight to my Texans stock for now.
Going into baseball, we are now in October, which for a baseball fan that's passionate like me is the best time of year, as we are now in the midst of the playoffs. And we've made it through round 1 since our last episode. We're about halfway through round 2. And we have had a lot of dominant performances. We haven't seen a lot of super close games, but we have had a lot of surprises. As, for instance, it wasn't really surprising when the Phillies swept the Marlins. They had a really dominant defensive performance led by Zach Wheeler in Game 1 when they won 4-1, and Aaron Nola in Game 2 when they won 7-1. But the real surpriser was when they got to round 2 and Game 1 in Atlanta as the biggest underdog of the round 2 teams got a Game 1 shutout. They won 3-0 with a dominant bullpen-led performance, and it looks like the Braves could go down early, which, as a passionate Braves fan, was really sad for me, especially when we got halfway into Game 2, and that was a 4-0 lead that the Phillies had, and I just thought it was over. I've seen this happen a lot, where we make it to the playoffs for the most hyped team going into it, and then we play a rival and we just sink. I don't know what it is, but playing a rival in the playoffs for the Braves just never seems to end well. However, we got back off the ropes this time. Ozzie Albies scored on an error in the 6th, and it just kind of slowly trickled up from there, as we had 2 home runs that were for 2 points each, one by Austin Riley in the 8th to get us a 5-4 lead, and with one of the best double plays in baseball history to clinch the final out of the game and tie the series 1-1. That series looks like it could be the best one in round 2 between Atlanta and Philadelphia. They're going to have their first Philadelphia game tonight to see who can untie that series. I'm personally rooting for the Braves. I think that the Braves will win it. I think that they're all around the more talented depth team. I think that the Phillies have probably a better top half of their pitching staff. However, I think that when it comes to just picking guys off the bench to hey, we need more people to come in, I think Atlanta's got them. So in the late game, I think we'll sneak back. We're going to steal one in Philly. I have confidence in that. Arizona was the team that was the most wishy-washy going into the playoffs, as they barely snuck in. They were a team that had a lot of pitching problems injury-wise going into the playoffs, and their bullpen looked shaky, and no one had a lot of confidence in that defense just because of all the injury they've endured. However, they looked really good so far. They were playing the NL Central winning Brewers in round 1, and after taking a gut punch early when they were down 3-0, they came back to win 6-3 in Game 1. And then in Game 2, it was essentially the same game again. As they had an early 2-0 deficit, it kind of trickled into the 5th inning, and then the Arizona hit them good late, and it was a 5-2 victory, where they swept Milwaukee and upset them on the road. While Arizona did get the Brewer upset, no one expected what happened in Game 1 of the LA series. LA is a major favorite. I'm pretty sure the betting line money-wise is 200. It was a big favorite. And they're also a feared road rival, where LA always beats Arizona. Arizona's like a little brother situation here. And they go in there and against a star pitcher, Clayton Kershaw, supposedly. They got 6 runs on him in the first inning before he ever even got an out. They pulled him. And it never stopped. It was an 11-2 just bashing of the Dodgers. The Dodgers never looked good in that game, ever. Game 2 starts up, and it was kind of more of the same. It wasn't as big of a final score gap in the end, but there was never a point where you thought the Dodgers had the driver's seat. It was a 4-2 win for the Arizona Diamondbacks that felt like it was theirs the whole time. The series will go back to Arizona this week, and it's really bizarre to think about how if Arizona wins either of their 2 home games, either tonight or Friday, the Dodgers will have another almost 100-win season where they go home early in the playoffs. This team just is not built for postseason, and we've seen it year in and year out since the COVID year. And it's just weird to see an Arizona team be the one to prove that.
So with these 2 teams, obviously it's tough to call in the middle of the series what would happen in the future, but you've seen a Arizona team kind of come not out of nowhere, but kind of pick up steam in the playoffs, and obviously there's more experienced teams that have had success and a little more hype going into them. But what would you say that your envisioned matchup in the NL final series would be right now?
I think the Braves will pull it out against the Phillies. I think that I don't expect both favorites to win their series, but at this point, after watching the Dodgers be the way they have for multiple years, and then seeing how just Arizona has throttled them. It has not looked good. The Dodgers look really down, and they're also really injured. They're missing if you get all of their injured players and put them on a completely different team and then make them healthy, that's a World Series contender. So I think that Arizona's going to pull it out against the Dodgers, and I don't think we have a 5-6 matchup in round 2. I think that the Braves despite the ugly offense so far, they're going to figure it out going down the line. I have faith in that Atlanta offense. I think Atlanta-Arizona is going to be our semifinal matchup in the NL. Meanwhile, in the AL, the Minnesota Twins are making history. This team has been a historically awful postseason team, but they are starting to rewrite the history books. In round one, they played the Toronto Blue Jays, who also have been underperforming a lot lately. And after a early 2-0 lead, thanks to a homer by Royce Lewis, the Minnesota Twins end up winning a game one they never trailed. It broke an absurd 18-game losing streak in the playoffs. And then the Twins managed to sweep the series with a shutout win of Toronto at 2-0. And this will be the first time the Twins make it to round two in 21 years. It's huge for the team of Minnesota. They end up going to play Houston, who's been a dynasty so far in the last 6-7 years of baseball. And game one went to Houston after a dominant performance by Justin Verlander. He looked like his usual self out there. He had 6 scoreless innings, and the Astros bullpen did just enough to hang on to that lead 6-4. Kyle Farmer in game two hit a 2-run homer in the second inning to get an early 3-0 lead, and the Minnesota never lost the grip of that game with an upset win in Houston 6-2, tied the series 1-1. And then Houston, last night, that game was ugly. Houston destroyed Minnesota. That game was never close. 9-1, definitely the most dominant, I'm not sure about Minnesota now, performance we've had. I don't know how you see a team lose like that in game three, know that they have to win both their next games to make it to the next round and be confident they can do that. That 9-1 loss was bad. However, it is steps in the right direction for Minnesota, as Houston's a team that could beat anybody right now, and Minnesota didn't even look like they'd make it to round two, so it's an improvement for them. They're going in the right direction. The other AL matchup is the only one that has got a team to round three. This is the one that we know what's happened in. The Texas Rangers, they played the Tampa Bay Rays in the wild card, and this was the most hyped up wild card round one match for sure, as the Texas Rangers led their division the majority of the way and then lost 4 of their last 6 games to drop it to Houston, but they still have had the best offense in the league, besides maybe the Braves, throughout the regular season. And then the Rays were the best team that didn't win their division by a long shot. So this round was really hyped up. But Texas made it really unentertaining. If you watched this series, you never were really on the edge of your seat. Texas had an upset road shutout in game one to win 4-0, and then in game two, they swept them and won 7-1. It was never, the Rays looked really bad, and they were injured, so it's, that's worth saying, but they should have did better than that. The Rangers then go to play the number 1 seed in the AL, the Orioles, and this has been the team to beat the majority of the AL season. The Orioles are really young, they're really fast, they have a great bullpen, one of the best we've seen, and they are really, really good. The Rangers made it not look that way. They swept them with a game one where the Rangers bullpen, who's had a lot of national criticism, held on to a 1-point lead to win 3-2, and then the offense showed off their volatility with an 11-8 winning game two where the Mitch Garver, he hit 5 RBIs for that team. 5 RBIs in one game can win you a game from anybody. And then with game three, the Rangers just went in there and rolled them 7-1. They're going to make it to the next round. And with Houston looking like they'll advance unless some real surprising things happen, it's looking like our AL semifinal is going to be Houston and Texas, which that's fun right there. In-state Texas battle for the AL pennant doesn't get much better than that.
Obviously we got baseball, MLS playoffs kind of coming down the pipeline with the dust starting to settle there on some standings. NBA is right around the corner. NFL is right in the swing of things. So, there's going to be a lot to talk about in these next few weeks here. So
hockey just started.
Yeah, hockey just started. Huge game between the Penguins and Blackhawks last night with Connor Bedard making his NHL debut. So there's going to be a lot that is going to be on here pretty soon. But I definitely think that every week we come in here, there's going to be a lot to talk about with baseball. I don't want that to get lost in the shuffle. So we're going to put you on the spot. You picked your final 4 teams. I want you to just kind of pick the bracket the rest of the way out and tell us who is who you see coming out of which series and then winning the World Series. And then we're going to come back to this in a couple weeks, and you're either going to be like the smartest person in the world, or we're gonna have a clip video of just every wrong take that we've ever had be released on that day. So go ahead, we're putting you on the spot. Predict the rest of the MLB season.
Okay, so my final four I picked out, which could, if that's wrong, then we're just off to a really bad start. But I had Arizona, Atlanta, and if it's Arizona, Atlanta, then I think that Atlanta wins that series. I think that they're the more experienced team. I think that both teams have a really good offense, and that kind of cancels out. And then if you look defensively, I think that Atlanta has more depth, even with the injuries. I think that these two teams are really similar. It wouldn't surprise me if it went either way, just because how they have explosive, volatile offenses, starting pitching staffs that are really good but kind of injured, and then bullpens that can go either way. They're essentially the same team. So I'm going to go with Atlanta, who's going to have home field advantage and experience on their side. AL side of things, it's almost a lock that it's Houston, Texas now, unless Houston chokes 2 games away. I just don't see that happening. So Houston, Texas, I think Texas wins that series. They have the momentum. They haven't looked vulnerable in the playoffs so far. I think that if you pick up steam at the right time, if you get hot in October, that's always a good thing in your favor. Houston's been consistent throughout the whole year, but they haven't really had a point where they've really gotten hot. Texas has been really hot and cold, but when they've been hot, they've been unbeatable. And right now, they're hot. I think that offense goes in there, and even if their bullpen looks as shaky as usual, their offense is going to win them enough games to get them the advance. Also, just using some history, meta-esque strategies. Usually our postseason World Series has been one favorite that got a bye and one team that hasn't. I don't know why it's that way, but for the last 5 years, it's been a team that's gotten a bye and a team that hasn't. Atlanta had a bye. Houston did too, so I think Houston will lose. So Atlanta and Texas is our World Series, and this is rough on me because I don't want Atlanta to lose. I can make the really biased take. I think Atlanta's just going to win. They're going to go all the way. However, I don't think we will. I think that if it ends up being Atlanta, Texas, from an unbiased perspective, Atlanta is not going to win that series. Just from our pitching staff cannot handle a Texas Rangers offense. That offense is ridiculous. And I know that Atlanta's offense is really good too, but the Rangers have pitching depth at starter, and their bullpen is overhated, in my opinion. I don't think it's actually that bad. Meanwhile, as a person who watches essentially every Atlanta Braves game, I can confirm that the back half of that bullpen could be way better. I think that if we had a really stunning closer, I'd pick us, but we don't. So I think that, from my perspective, our AL pennant is going to go to the Texas Rangers, our NL pennant goes to the Braves, and our champion by the end of the year is the Texas Rangers.
I like all the insight and the stats and logic going into that, so I'm going to do the complete opposite and just go off the vibes here. I'm going to pick the Diamondbacks to win it all. I like the Cinderella story vibe that they have to it, kind of sneaking into the playoffs and then making noise in the first round, and a big upset and sweeping the Brewers team that was in a really tough NL Central division the whole year. And I'm just we're gonna randomly pick here. I'm picking the Diamondbacks to win the World Series. This has been episode 5 of the Back Page. You can find and listen to the podcast on Spotify and YouTube. 8:59 on the dot.